Imagine this. You're about to tackle your very first technical interview. You're prepped, you've caffeinated, you're ready to take on the world, or at least that's what you think. The recruiter then throws in a simple question, reverse a string, and suddenly you're there thinking, what the heck is even a string, right? Does any of that sound familiar? Don't worry, we've all been through that. So that's why today on the podcast, I'm breaking down all the details about the first or just one of the first technical interviews that you go through, so you can prepare for your interview without the actual stress. So get a coffee or whatever drink you like, and let's deep dive into what a technical interview is, how is it composed, and some of the red flags that you have to look out for. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Scripting Then podcast. As usual, I'm Fernando, your host, and today in this episode we're going to be talking about the first technical interview. Specifically, we're going to cover the different phases of how you get to that initial interview and what happens during that, or what can happen during that in that interview. Some of the common mistakes to avoid, things that you should not do during that process, the actual importance of soft skills during that process, so that you can also keep that in mind during the interview. And also a couple of points about not you, but rather how the interview process is a two-way street, and a couple of red flags about the actual company, not you, but rather the company that you're interviewing with, so that you know what to look out for and what to run away from if that, one of them comes up. Anyway, let's start at the beginning and let's break down the actual interview process. And just a disclaimer, the actual stages that I'm going to describe here are coming out of my own experience. I've been interviewing for years. I jumped around too many companies, some people would say, but the point here is that every company tends to do this on their own way. There are a couple of stages through the entire process that are fixed, like the initial call, like the technical conversation, but in between them and afterwards, some companies like to add extra layers and like extra verifications. That depends on the company, that depends on what you're looking out for and the industry especially. But the way it usually happens is you first get the screening call, essentially, and it's a quick call with, usually it's not even with someone technical, someone from HR. In some cases, it might be some like high seniority individual from the tech team that will have a conversation with you. They will go over your own background. They will do essentially what some people call like a high level fit into the company, and if there is like a specific role or project that they want to assign you to, then they might like just tick a few boxes that they've been given. Like, do they know about JavaScript? Do they know about game dev? Do they have like basic game design knowledge? Do they have basic understanding of algorithms? The point here is that you getting passed through this interview means you have at a high level what they're looking for. They're already interested in your profile. They're already, someone looked at you, had a conversation with you, and they said, this person could be working with us here. That's fantastic. That's the first stage. You're done. But this is far from over yet. Usually what comes after this is some sort of coding challenge. Some companies will send you the challenge so that you can work on it a couple of days on your own, and then they will review the code with you. Some people like that. Some people feel like they're just being used by the company. It depends on what kind of challenge they send you. In my experience, if they send you like work on this feature for us, or for a product that we're working on, that sounds a little iffy. That sounds a little strange, especially because they could use your code then and expand on it and then release a feature for free. But in other cases, they will just give you like a generic use case, like create this API or like consume this weather API and give me like a UI to review the data, something like that. So again, it depends. Some people would say that they just simply don't want take-home assignments. That's fair. You absolutely can. But if you're kind of trying to get your first job, you probably usually would do whatever it takes to get it. In those situations, if you actually agree to perform the interview, just keep in mind that they want to understand that you understand the code that you present to them. So, couple things: don't copy paste without understanding what you're copying. Simply make sure that you focused on what they want And if you're thinking, well, I'm gonna add this and these extras because it'll make for a better deliverable, that's fantastic. Just make sure that you first focus on what they ask for. If it's a weather app that consumes a single API that they ask for, that's fantastic. Do that. And then if you want to add some extra, like a mobile version of the UI, or if you want to add like a data from 2 other APIs, fantastic. Go ahead and do it if you do have the time, but just make sure that you do comply with the initial requirements, because if you work extra to get those extra features in and you don't deliver the basic minimum that they ask for, then that's not going to look good on you. That's actually going to show that you can't really focus on, and that you go out and over engineer a solution if you're left to your own devices. So first, make sure that you focus on what they ask for, and then if you want to, go ahead and add any extra. But if you do have the time, because if you add an extra and then the code is rushed, if it's not commented, if it's not following best practices, then they're also going to notice that. They're going to notice the difference between the basic features that are well designed and the code is clean, and then something that's rushed. It's not an issue if you deliver the bare minimum that they ask for. That's why they ask it. It's not really the important part is not really what you deliver in the sense of as long as it's complete, but rather how you explain it to them later. There's chances are they're going to have then a follow-up call with you where you walk through the code, explain your reasoning, how you went through some scenarios. They might actually have questions about why you implemented things the way you did. And if you wrote the code, it shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a stress-inducing situation. You know the code. You are sure that what you did is right. Then simply explain yourself that way. After this one, and it might be at the same time as the follow-up call if you did have a coding challenge, or it might just be like, a completely different instance, but there will be usually like a technical interview sort of scenario where one or more individuals from the company will sit with you and they will have a conversation. There are different versions of this. The one I like to perform is I just sit with you and have a conversation about your background, and then I listen to what you tell me, the type of projects you worked on, and the type of technologies you used, and then I will just ask follow-up questions to make sure that you're not just making it up or that you actually went through those scenarios. Some other people like to sit down with you in face to face, have a whiteboard, and ask you to write some code there, which is something I completely disagree with. And after 20 years of doing this, if you ask me today to write code on a whiteboard, I will probably say no during an interview, because the interview process, even though you might have years of experience, decades of experience, actually, you know that you're being evaluated. So it's a difficult process to go through. It adds extra stress, and you know that every single line, every single letter that you write on that whiteboard is going to be reviewed and judged. So personally, I would say no to a whiteboard type of interview, unless what you want me to write in the you want me to use the whiteboard simply to draw a diagram or explain something that or use it as a tool for me to explain myself and answer your question. But that's me. If you feel comfortable writing code on a whiteboard, more power to you. But the point here is that out of this technical interview, what they should get is that you know your stuff. And by your stuff, I mean what's in your resume, that you're not making things up. Some developers, they like to add a little extra to their CVs, or instead of adding a little extra, they just say, well, I actually did a POC on PHP, so I'll just put PHP there with no extra details. So they maybe think I actually know more than what I do. That's a problem on its own, because you're not properly communicating your level on each of these technologies. And I don't mean you should go into a lot of details, but at least you should have some sort of description of what you've done with each technology, because you don't want to be called for roles where they're just looking for someone else. I do agree when people say that if you have a list of requirements for a specific role and you just meet half of them, you should still apply. Yes, absolutely. But your resume shouldn't say that you actually know 100% of, that you're 100% of match, essentially, that you know all those skills. It should be honest. You should apply with a resume that focuses on what you do know and not on what you don't. But if you add extras just to fit their criteria, they will call you up on an interview expecting you to know those stuff. So if you don't, then you're wasting their time and you're wasting your time. It's just nobody really likes that. So you will end up getting rejected for the wrong reasons. When you could have gotten the job if you had been honestly from the start and say, well, actually, PHP, I know a little bit about it. I worked on a POC a couple of years ago, but I know JavaScript and I know C and I know Pascal. I don't know, and then so I know I can extrapolate my knowledge to there and ramp up quick. That's a fantastic interview. You show that you have some contact with the technology, that you know a little bit about it, and that you're willing to learn. That's way more than simply putting PHP there and hoping they don't know it. So keep that in mind, and also make sure that you're honest on the resume and during the interview. And up to this stage, we're usually done with the technical interview. Now, keep in mind that there might be more instances of this interview. In some companies, they like to have like an initial generic technical interview that will fit you and make sure that you know your stuff, and then they will do a second interview with a team member. So they might go through the process of asking you more like day-to-day questions on how you work, or even maybe in some scenarios, which I've never gone through, but I know they happen sometimes, is they will ask you to join for a day and work with them like in a pair programming scenario. So they actually see you coding, see your process. I don't really agree with that, but in some scenarios it happens. And even I've also been through processes where you have like the initial, and then you go up the ladder and say like, well, your engineering manager will also like to have a technical interview with you to ask you about how you work with them. And then the CTO will have another interview to ask more technical questions about your profile and your background. All valid scenarios or all valid forms of technical interviews. In my experience with the initial one, you should be more than good to go, but some companies like to check and double check and triple check. Just so you can expect companies to go through a long and lengthy interview process with in the technical aspects. It's not uncommon, and it's not really a reflection of your profile and them not trusting that you know what you know. So don't get nervous, don't get anxious about that. It's just them being extra cautious of who you joins their team. Now, after that, usually what would happen is you get another more like behavioral interview, if you will. Some companies like to have some sort of psych evaluation as well and get you through some tests. That usually would happen, in my experience, years ago. Now it's not that common, but some companies do have a version of it, and other companies have some sort of like, let's have a conversation type of interview with the HR again, or with someone who has a psychological profile, and they will profile you without you actually thinking about it. Some of the companies, depending whether they have like army or government contracts, they might do a background check on you as well. They might call all contacts. They might call some working references to ask specific questions about you. I went through that for one company. Everything went well, obviously, but it's a lengthy and really boring process. If you went through all of that, you've been through, the cultural fit, the site fit, the technical fit, you're done, essentially. You're probably going to get an offer, and then it's up to you to really decide whether it's a good offer for you and you want to accept it or not. If you've been through that process and you got to the last step and you got the offer, then you're good. But just to double check, let's make sure that you don't make these mistakes when you come into some of these interviews. Usually try to keep whatever you're working on, whatever solution they ask for you. Maybe it's a coding challenge, or maybe it's just like having a technical conversation and they pose a fake problem and they ask you to sort of give an explanation of how you would work on it or how you would solve it. Try to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. That's not really what they're looking for. Especially if you go with the coding challenge and you overcomplicate it, then what they will get is this person likes to over-engineer their solutions, which is not a great thing to say, right? And if you're having a conversation and you're overcomplicating the explanation, then they might get lost. They might, lose focus on what you're saying, or they're just gonna think the same thing. You're just overcomplicating things. You're over-engineering a solution that should have been like go from A to B That's it, straight line, and you're going all over the place. So keep it simple and try to provide a solution that they want, nothing else. Now, this one is a little bit, I don't know if it's a problem, if it's a red flag on your side, but it's something that you should keep in mind, especially when you're just getting started and some of the technologies that you know you're going to be working on are just new to you. A big problem there is not practicing, or even not practicing enough. I mean, I'm not saying just spend 8 hours a day working on coding challenges and lead code challenges and things like that. No, but at least do the proper research, figure out what they're working with, maybe from the job description, maybe from understanding what the company is doing, and do some POCs. Look at code, understand what you're gonna be dealing with, because they will ask you questions specifically about the technology that they are working with and that they expect you to work with. So it's not just about saying, yes, I did work with it a couple of years ago and I'm done. So your knowledge on it is going to be limited and outdated after 2 years. So that's not enough. Just build a couple of POCs, something short, something for you to prepare for what you're going to be dealing with so that you're aware of it, essentially. Solve a couple of problems. If you're new to development, if you haven't really worked as a dev, working on coding challenges might be a good idea. I'm not saying spend 8 hours a day, but yes, do spend a couple hours every couple of days going through these problems. Not so that you get a perfect score, not so that you can create a profile that you can show later, but rather so that you're faced against problems that, might come up during the interview. Again, there are no guarantees here, but any kind of preparation is better than just not preparing at all. And this one goes hand in hand with the previous one, skipping company research. I've been there, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't understand why you would do it, but if you're applying for a job, to work for a company, and if you go into the interview without even knowing what they work on and what they build, it's a little bit strange. I'm not saying that they will ask you questions about them and see if you know them, but they might say, have you heard of us? Have you used any of our products? And if you say just, I have no idea who you are, just, you had a job interview, so I applied. It's an honest reply, but it's not the best one. So do a little bit of company research, figure out what they do. Maybe they have like open source libraries that you can look into, read up on, and then mention them. Maybe they worked on products or they worked on solutions that you've used in the past, so you can also mention that. It adds a little bit extra and it shows that you care. Not necessarily something that in reality and in practice should be like a differentiating factor, because again, honestly, you're there because you need a job. That should be enough. But then again, in some situations, they will really like it that that you've been through their information, their website, and that you've actually looked into the products, the libraries, or whatever they have. So again, it doesn't hurt. It will add a little bit to their perspective of you. So do it. And then the last one is not really anything to do with being technical or technical interviews in general, but rather you as a person. You are actually a person. You are actually a human being. So don't be a robot during the interview. I know, and I've been there. The first few interviews are really stressful. You don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know what to expect. You've never done it before, but you have had conversations with other people. I'm assuming here you probably have some sort of social life, social interactions, whether you have friends, family, or a partner or not, a neighbor. You don't live in the middle of nowhere, isolated from the rest of society. You do know how to interact with other humans. So use that during the interview. The other person there, they're usually not as nervous as you are. So they will be open for you to you making a joke, to you making some sort of like remark about the weather, the last soccer results, I don't know, whatever you enjoy. And the point is, you're dealing with a human being. So don't just go monosyllabic and say yes, no, and be done. Just crack a joke or make a remark about their offices, or I don't know, if you're having like a remote, one-to-one, and they have a cool background or some sort of like nerdy thing in the background, just make a comment about it. They probably like it. That's why they put it there. So they'd be happy that you noticed. It's the little things that will add a lot to your profile and to their impression of you. So keep that in mind as well. You don't have to go with a checklist before, but relax. That's the point. Relax. You're having a conversation with another human being. Make sure you are able to laugh at something. Even if you're making a mistake and you're laughing at your own mistake, you're laughing at yourself, that's also a great display of confidence, and you show that you know how to deal with humans. And believe me, a hiring manager will love that on a developer, because usually especially junior developers who are just getting started, they're too technical, they focus on that and they forget about their soft skills. It's really hard to deal with them, to work with them at the beginning until they settle in and they are, actually become part of the team. So if you show that you know how to interact with others, in their brain, they will automatically say, this person can actually join the team and start working, with everyone else from day one. So that's a check for me. That gives me the segue to the next section, which is the importance of soft skills in this technical process, which is ironic because to me, soft skills are like a huge part of the conversation that I usually have with a candidate. I obviously want them to know the technical stuff that I need them to work on so that I can hire them. That's a given. But if I have to pick between a robot that knows everything that I want them and a person who actually is a pleasure to have a conversation with, and they know half of it, I will go with the second one. So I know I can interact with them. I know that in my day-to-day, it's going to be much easier to deal with them and to have them as part of my team than someone who's unable to have human interactions. So show that you can communicate. Show that you are articulate when you have a conversation. Don't just go monosyllabic. Don't just go yes, no, maybe. But maybe it's not just one. Maybe, I don't know. But rather, explain yourself. Give a reasoning behind every answer. This is the answer, and let me explain why I'm thinking what I'm thinking. Let me explain how I got there. That extra communication, that extra explanation, it's going to show that you know how to open up, how to communicate with others, how to interact with other human beings. And that is key to any technical role, because you're never, usually, like 99.9% of the time, you're usually going to be part of a team. And in those rare occasions where you're the only developer, you're still part of a company. You're still part of, you still have to report to someone. And in those scenarios, it's even more relevant to have soft skills, because the other person is probably not going to be technical. So you need to know how to interact with someone that doesn't have the same level of understanding of the technology of the things that you're doing. Usually, and this is also something to think about for the future, you reach a point in your career where knowing more technical stuff doesn't get you anywhere. You keep being a great developer, but a great software architect, whatever. But if you want to go like team lead, engineer manager, CTO, whatever, there's different skills that you need to develop that are not technical. And soft skills, being able to interact with other people, being able to lead other people, meaning you should be empathetic, and a lot of other skills, they're not technical. And if they're not technical and you show that you already have them, you show that you're going to be adding a lot more value than just what you were able to memorize from the PHP documentation side 20 minutes before the interview. These things are very important during a technical interview and afterwards during your day-to-day job. So make sure that you're comfortable enough doing a conversation with another human being so that you can show that you have soft skills. Another really important aspect that is related to the previous one is being able to work as part of a team. As a developer, you're usually never going to be working alone. You're going to be working as part of a team or as part of a company. That said, it doesn't have to be, if this is your first time working as a developer, you might think, well, I never worked as a developer, so I can't really speak to my experience as working as part of a team. But you've probably been part of a team somewhere else. Maybe you're switching careers. Maybe you're coming from another industry and you worked as part of a team there. Bring it up. Mention it. If the conversation goes that way, double down on it and say, well, actually, I've never worked as part of a dev team, but I've been working as part of a team in sales, for example. So I do know what it means to be part of a team. That's fantastic. Maybe you haven't done that. Maybe you're fresh out of school, but you've most likely done some teamwork in the past at school as well, like working for a project, paper or whatever. That's also valuable information. They do need to understand that you understand what it means to work as part of a team, essentially. That's why I bring it up. That's why they might bring it up during the conversation as well. It's important for them to understand that you're aware that you're not going to be isolated there, and that whatever you do will impact others, and that if you help, if you bring something useful to a table, it will help the entire company, will help the entire team. But if you don't bring it up, they might not have that sensation. They might not see you as someone who's aware of their environment. So bring it up, make sure that you make the connection between whatever team, maybe not a technical team, but whatever team you worked on, and show that you know how it maps into the team that you're going to be working in. It's a really interesting point to bring up during the interview, even if it's a technical interview, and it really shows that you know what you're getting yourself into. And believe me, not everyone is at that stage during their first few interviews. And the final one is show that you have emotional intelligence. In this context, it means that you know how to take and how to give feedback. And that's a really big part of working in our industry. Whatever you worked on, whatever you do, usually will get reviewed, and that will translate into feedback. So a code review session, simply a code review session. If you're not capable of getting your code reviewed and criticized in a constructive manner, then you're probably not going to make it as dev. And I'm not saying this to gatekeep, or not saying this as a, quit and go look for something else, but rather just integrate this into your being. Whatever you do is going to get criticized. As long as the criticism is constructive, meaning you're being showed that you made a mistake or that whatever you worked on can be improved, then you should be able to take that professionally and say, that's fantastic. Let me work on that. Let me integrate that into my coding process. And then next time it's going to be better. The quality of the code is going to be better. That's a normal process. That's something that is completely valid. And that's something that should happen as part of your IT career. If instead you go through that process and then you get mad and take that criticism as personal and think that you're being your own person is being attacked, then that's a problem. That's going to be an issue, and that's going to create conflict where it shouldn't. These are not really technical things to work on. These are not technical aspects or points to bring up during a tech interview, but rather soft skills that you should show, that you should actively show. During this interview process, there might be specific moments where you think it might be a good idea to bring this up now, and that's fantastic. By all means, do it, mention it. But if you're not able to bring them up, or if you think that bringing a specific topic during the conversation might feel forced, then try to show it. Try to connect it with an idea. Try to mention it passing, and if they want to know more, they will ask. They will double down on that specific topic, and then you can explore that and show how you actually feel about it, and why and why you brought it up during the conversation. Now, at this stage, I would say if you're thinking about these things, if you're taking care to avoid the problems that I mentioned, you're good to go. You should be confident enough on your own skills to go to any technical interview or to apply to any job. Obviously, I cannot guarantee that you will get a job on the first try, on a few first tries. Actually, the industry is really brutal in this aspect, but you have everything you need to go through the interview process. Now, with that said, there are a couple points that you should be looking out for during that interview. Not them, but rather you. The first one is to remember that the interview process is a two-way street. That means, yes, you're getting evaluated. Yes, you're getting interviewed, but they are also getting evaluated and they're also getting interviewed. It's not just about them trying to understand if you're a fit for them, but also you trying to understand if the company and the team is a fit for you, if you're going to feel comfortable working with them. Obviously, that might feel a little bit entitled in some scenarios. You might feel like, who are you to say if they're actually a good company or a good team to work on? But remember, at the end of the day, this is all people working with people. So as a person, do you feel comfortable working with them based on what you've learned from them? And that's key. Out of that whole interview process, you should be learning something about them. There are a few questions that you can ask that they won't only not look or sound weird, but rather they will make you look better during the interview, because they will kind of show that you care about where you're working For example, asking about the team. What's the dev culture? What's the team culture on the company? How are teams organized? A very valid question to ask as well is, do they work extra hours? Is it common to work extra hours? It doesn't really mean that you are against it or pro or whatever. It just means that you want to know where you're getting yourself into. Understanding sort of the role that you're going to be filling in. In some situations, they just ask for a generic profile. They don't tell you what project you're going to be working on, or they don't even tell you sort of details about the role. So asking one personal question that I love to ask is, what will your expectations of me be if I join your team? What do you want me to work on for the first month? What do you want me to achieve during the first month? That will tell them that I know that they will expect something from me, which is fantastic already. And that will also inform me, if I actually get an offer and accept it, what I need to work on from day one. So I don't have to wait to join to start asking those questions. I can just automatically say, all right, so I know what they're expecting of me, so I know what to work on from day one. That's going to be showing a lot more proactivity than me waiting for someone to tell me what to do. These are questions that you should be asking to your interviewer. And if there are many stages to the interview process, it's not a problem to repeat that question to everyone, because those people might be like in different roles in the hierarchy as well. Maybe your initial technical interview is with someone who might be your colleague, your teammate. What would you expect of me during the first month? It's not going to be the same answer if then you go to the engineering manager and ask that question, and then go to the CTO and ask that question. Learning about what they will expect from you, learning about what they want out of the role, those are things that are fantastic questions. Obviously, don't go asking during the interview process, what is it that you do? Because that should have been previous research. That's probably public information that you could have gotten with a simple Google search. So make sure that what the type of questions that you are making makes sense during that context, and that this is not just information that you could have gotten prior to the interview. Obviously, if you did the research and didn't understand what they do, or do have questions about what they do, go ahead and ask. That's fantastic. During the interview process, they should give you a moment to ask questions yourself. If they don't, then that's a problem, but you can actually force the situation as well. I think that a good interview should include questions from both sides. Usually in our industry, the most number of questions will come from their side, but if you have several questions about the role, the company, the expectations, go ahead and make them. They're going to make you look better. And other than the questions, just make sure you pay attention actually to the answers that you get, because those answers will inform you as well about the kind of environment that you are getting yourself into. If you're going for the first job, it's usually something that you don't ever consider saying no to a job offer, but you should weigh in the type of responses that you got to your questions. See if they make you feel excited. See if you thinking about that information that you got from them makes you want to work for them more, or if they actually sound or bring up a little like an internal alarm and say, well, actually, that makes me have some doubts, because that's also why you're asking these questions. Again, you're evaluating them as much as they are evaluating you. Again, maybe it's not a great feeling to say, thank you, but no thank you. But in some situations, you might want to do it. And on that note, there are some red flags as well that you should be aware of when you are interviewing with a company. And if you see these red flags, then this company is probably not a great one to work with. The one and the first one, and the one that I just blows my mind that we're still talking about it, because by now no company should be selling themselves this way to employees or to future employees, is stating that they work like a family, that they feel like a family, that they are a family. This usually happens when the company is small enough, a small startup, or when you're joining a team inside a big company, a small team, a very close team, and they just sell you that idea. In my experience, just run away. Say, all right, fantastic, thank you, and then never answer the emails. Again, it might sound like a harsh advice coming for someone who is looking for their first job, and that might be like their first real opportunity, their first real offer letter. But companies, our team, are not a family. They don't work like a family. They cannot work like a family, because your father, your brother, they're never going to fire you if you don't do things like they expect you to. They might, bring it up. They might say something hurtful or whatever, but they will never fire you off the family because you missed a couple of meetings. So what I'm trying to say here is that saying we're like a family usually translates to we will ask you to work extra hours. We will ask you to turn your life around so that we get the most out of it. But when you need something from us, we will not be able to give it to you simply because we're a company and we cannot make exceptions for everyone, which is what a family would do, right? So it's fantastic that they mention it, that they say it that way. But it's fantastic because that should be like a red flag for you and say something so that that's not a company that you want to work with. Now, another potential red flag is when they are giving vague descriptions, either on the job description, either during the interview, when you start asking questions and their responses are not really direct. Again, you can ask very direct questions, like, do you have extra hours? Are people working extra hours? How often are people working extra hours in your project? Do you pay for extra hours? Those are all very valid questions. And if you don't get a direct response, right? Like yes or no, and yes, this is how much we pay, or no, we don't pay for them, but we do have to work extra hours every once in a while. Those are all reality checks that you have to make sure they happen. If they instead say, well, no, maybe it doesn't really come up, but in some situations that we might have to work some extra hours, that doesn't really tell you anything. So what it does tell you is that that's probably a red flag. That's probably how they deal with extra work. That's probably how they deal with people like trying to get compensation or trying to get like a fair treatment during the scenarios where extra work is required. And if that's the case, then they're probably not going to be fair to you either. So in other words, that's a red flag. If you hear something that's that vague, try to double down on it, try to double check, try to check or re-ask the question and make sure that they understand why you're asking it. But if the answers are still vague, think about it and put it, on the red flags list. Another potential red flag is a high turnover on the employee list. Essentially, a lot of people like leaving and a lot of people joining, and then after a couple months, everyone leaving again, and then more people joining. That usually means that it's usually a big company or a company that is working in a very attractive industry, attractive product, or with attractive technology, but that they don't really treat their employees well enough, or either by not paying them enough or by having toxic working environments. But if there is a lot of people leaving at the same time constantly, because that can happen every once in a while, but if it's a constant thing, then that might be a problem as well. How do you find out if they have a big turnover? Other than asking, there might be like some sites online with reviews, like Glassdoor, for example. That's a very common one. You can get like former employees giving you feedback or reviews on specific companies. They talk about salaries. They talk about a lot of things that in an anonymous way, that it's a really great way for you to figure out what goes in during those periods and then why are people leaving. So do a little research on the company, Google them, search for them in Glassdoor or some other similar site, and see what people are talking about, see what they're saying. And if you can reach out to an actual employee or a former employee, you can go through LinkedIn and ask why they left. That's also something that you might want to do. So make sure to follow up on that red flag and go back to that list and just decide whether you want to put it or not. But do a little research. And the final red flag that I want to mention it because I've actually seen like people either proud of it or actually putting it on the job descriptions themselves. To me, it just makes no sense. But when they talk about green culture, when they talk about they work in 24/7. If you have a boss or a interviewer telling you that the job should be 100% of your time, it should be your life, it should be more than you should be working on this alone and it should be all your focus, then chances are what they're saying is we're going to ask you to do as much work as possible and we're not going to give you one extra dime. And let me just make sure this is clear. When you sign a contract with a company, you sign a contract for a specific amount of money to work for them, usually 8 hours a day. Some countries, some companies might have different deals, but you usually like from Monday to Friday, from 9 to 5 or from 9 to 6, something like that. Any extra work that you do or that you're asked to perform outside those working hours is considered extra work. Mind you, during operation days, when you're like already on the job and there is a hard deadline or there is a critical bug on production, you might yourself think, actually just let me work these extra hours. It doesn't really matter. We need to fix it. That's fantastic. That's a great attitude to have, but it should be the exception. If you're constantly or regularly asked to work extra hours because there are constantly mad deadlines, there are constantly huge production bugs, there are constantly clients complaining about every feature of the project, and the entire team needs to work 3 or 4 extra hours every day, or they have to come in to work during the weekend after weekend, then that's a problem. And that's not a problem on you, it's a problem on the company. And they need to obviously solve it themselves, management, better planning, whatever. But if the solution is to ask the dev team to come in and work extra every single week, then you need to be compensated somehow. And it shouldn't be getting a pizza during lunch or getting movie tickets, which I did back in the day when I started working. They would ask me to work during Saturdays. They would pay for my meal. I didn't know better. I didn't know any better, so I was happy with that. Eventually, I learned that it would have been better to get paid, to get that extra money paid, especially because those extra hours are usually paid at a higher rate than your normal working hour. Live and learn. But the point is, those are all red flags. Those are all problems that should not be the standard of the industry. And within the IT industry, there are a lot of sub-industries like game, web, and others. It's really hard to make a generic statement that it's true for every industry, but it is true that in some industries this is not the common thing, and it is also true, sadly, that in some other industries overtime and green culture is absolutely true, and that also goes from culture to culture, from country to country. So it's really difficult to say something that's generic and at the same time useful in this scenario, but keep that in mind. Your contract is from a limited amount of hours on a limited amount of days during the week. Bringing this up is completely fine. That's the deal that you make with them. So if they're asking you for more time, it's perfectly fine that you ask for more money in return. So keep that in mind. And if they're from day one, from the job description or from the interview process, they're already openly stating that they like the green culture, they like to green hours and hours, they like to work extra, they like to come in during weekends because they, whatever reason, consider that and remember that that is what you're getting yourself into. Remember that if you agree to that offer letter, if it comes, then don't be surprised that you're going to be working extra every single day. Other than that, just say no, thank you, and take it as a red flag and move on to the next company. And that's it. That's the whole episode. Going through interviews, it's a nerve-wracking experience, especially if you're just getting started. I've been at it for 20 years and it's still nerve-wracking in some situations. It feels like I'm not ready. It feels like, they're going to find out that I know half of what my resume says, even though my resume is completely honest. But it's normal to feel that way. That's what I'm trying to say. What you gain over the years is the certainty that you're just a human being talking with another human being. That's the main advice that I will give you here when it comes to approaching a technical interview. You're just two people talking tech. And if you're passionate about tech and they're passionate about tech, that's all you need. It might be a match, it might not be a match, but at least it shouldn't be like a nerve-wracking experience that makes you feel like you want to throw up. That's it. And that's it. Honestly, I mean, that's a whole episode. I do have another shameless plug to bring up since we're talking about interview process and we're talking about joining the IT industry. A couple of years ago, I did publish a book titled Skills of a Successful Software Engineer, where I used my own 20 years of experience to explain how that process goes. I do go into more details about the interview process, the red flags, and what to look out for during like a show offer, and then what to expect out of your initial time as a developer, and what to focus on to grow during that process, and so on. So there are a lot of things to get out of that book from my own experience. So if you want to, if you're interested, if you're thinking about or going through the process of joining, I will leave a link to the book on the show notes so that you can check it out. If you're interested, read it. It might come in handy. Otherwise, just reach out either through LinkedIn or through X, whatever. Just reach out and I'll be happy to have a conversation and answer any questions. Anyway, that's it. Thank you again for listening. Thank you for watching if you're in YouTube, and thank you for subscribing. Make sure you subscribe wherever you are to get more episodes like this one. That's it. Thank you, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye. And that was it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to rate the podcast in your favorite podcasting app so that it can reach more developers. In the meantime, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter or X, as people call it, just look for me at DeleteMan123. And that's it. Thank you, and catch you on the next one.